how to drive college costs down and quality up in California and Texas, emerging textbook solutions. My name is Kelly McDonald. I'm the Director of Outreach at Flat World Knowledge, and I'd first like to go over a couple of housekeeping items. You should see the GoToWebinar interface somewhere on your screen. By clicking the orange arrow in the Grab tab, you can open and close your control panel, revealing the questions panel if it is hidden. Given the size of today's group, we can only take written questions and encourage you to submit them using this pane throughout the webcast, simply by typing in your question and hitting send. We will answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation. Also note that we are recording today's webcast. All registrants will receive a link to the archived webcast within 48 hours to view and or share. Now I'd like to introduce you to today's speakers. First, we'll hear from Senator Dean Florez. Senator Dean Florez currently serves as the California State Senate Majority Leader and has represented the Central Valley region where he was born and raised for over a decade. He was first elected to the State Assembly in 1998, serving 2 terms before being elected to the State Senate in 2002. He was elevated to the position of Senate Majority Leader in November 2008. Senator Florez is also a Harvard-trained municipal finance professional, having received his MBA from Harvard in 1993. He had previously received a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science from UCLA, where he also served as the student body president. Senator Florez has been an outspoken leader on many issues, including clean air, food safety, government accountability, infrastructure, financing, and development, as well as equality and education, a topic particularly relevant for today. Second, we'll hear from Dr. Charles Cook. Charles Cook is currently Vice Chancellor for Instruction at Houston Community College, a system of 6 colleges in Houston, Texas, serving 60,000 students each semester. At HCC, he is responsible for development and coordination of academic and workforce credit programs, grants, distance education, instructional technology, library services, international initiatives, and academic partnerships. Charles received his baccalaureate degree, summa cum laude in history at UT Austin, and holds both master's degrees in history and a doctorate degree in education from the University of Houston. Previously, Charles worked as Director of Instructional Programs for the CTC Division of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board from 1994 to 1999. We'll also hear today from Eric Frank. Eric Frank is the co-founder and president of Flat World Knowledge. Eric spent 11 years in higher education textbook publishing with Cengage and then Pearson Education, where he served as Director of Marketing for a division of Pearson prior to starting Flat World Knowledge. And finally, we'll hear from Dennis Passovoy. Dennis has over 30 years of experience as an accomplished business executive and entrepreneur, having founded 4 technology and service companies. Dennis is currently the president of RFG Inc. and a principal in Leader Labs, an innovative approach to leadership development and employee engagement that is based on the West Point leadership model. In addition, Dennis also teaches management and organizational behavior in the Department of Management at the McCombs School of Business at University of Texas in Austin. Both his bachelor and master's degrees are from UCLA. With that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and I'd like to turn the floor over to our first speaker, Senator Dean Florez.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, thanks to everyone for being here. Obviously, California and with Texas on the line could be, in many cases, because one could argue, a very large leader in trying to move, if you will, textbook costs in the right direction. And let me just give you, if I could, an indication of where California is at today. Obviously, as all economies probably throughout the nation, California has been hit very, very hard over the last 6 years with, if you will, non-sustainable budget cuts due to falling revenue. In fact, we've seen our $100 billion revenue numbers at the budget level cut down to somewhere near 60 to 65 billion, even moving into this year. So you see tremendous amounts of pressure with revenues that are declining in California to make massive amounts of cuts. And at the same time, we see a need for at least 1 million more jobs for folks who have a bachelor's degree. And the question for California really is, are we on track to produce those types of degrees, or will we face shortages in order to kind of move us into the next and better economy? And so this is a very timely call because we are just about to hit an issue moving into the next few months where we see student fee increases at the UC level that are very probable to be passed on to students once again. We see probable student fee increases at the CSU level. And our community colleges, although the issue is simply may not be increases, as you know, as affordability hits UC and CSU, more students will then move to the community college level, which has a huge impact because courses are already impacted. We've seen waiting lists in many cases at our community colleges rising over the last 2 years, and in many cases not the money to do the additional courses. So you see students are going to be facing that here, and the issue for most of us here at the state is how do we get our transfer rates up? How do we get our students moving through the system? When we see, in many cases, particularly at the community college levels, book prices being rising every single year, publishers' invoices rising, campus bookstore markups rising, textbook costs in many cases are 60 to 70% of a community college student's experience in terms of overall cost per semester or year. So we have some very significant issues to deal with in California, particularly when it comes to book cost. And this all adds up to this year having a very substantial $25 billion deficit once again. So the actions that our particular systems have made, I think, should be commended. However, our community colleges have had 2 textbook summits. Hopefully the continued discussion of open educational resources will be something that we'll focus on in a very tough budgetary environment. Our CSU system, Cal State system here in California, has produced some movement in terms of what they call the digital marketplace initiatives, which I think are wonderful. And of course you see are just beginning discussions when it comes to next generation technologies in terms of moving students from books to platforms that make some sense, allowing them to pull down from a computer or their iPhones or any other technology that might make affordability a better issue. So we really, of course, want to thank Flat World Knowledge for making this particular webcast available, because it seems as though California will be moving in the right direction, either under duress or moving in the sense that it has to look at other methods of providing lower book costs for our students in our system. There's really no other way to do it, and I can tell you the tremendous amounts of pressure at the state level's budget for this year on Cal grants, which seem to be rising every year, but yet seem to be covering publisher and book costs that also rise every single year. And so to just give you an example of what we're trying to face, I'll give you an example just from one community college. Example would be, let's use the Communication in Our Lives, this speech and communication textbook used by a lot of students in our community college space. Well, to give you an example, in 2004, let's go back to 2002, this book was priced, in 2004 was priced at about $53. In 2006, the publisher released a 4th edition of the textbook, but as we know, bundled it with some workbooks containing some exercises. Well, that then rose in 2 years to $76 per textbook with the bundle. And then 2 years later, the publisher released the 5th edition of the textbook, which actually took the workbook and bundled out of it. So now we've gone from a single to a bundled and back to the single book. But in the 5th edition, the book cost $92. So we've gone from $53 in 2006, $76 2 years later, and then the final price 2 years after that at $92. Just an example of what an individual textbook price has done, how it's grown, how it impacts a community college student in many cases. And as you probably know, our biggest issue in California is completion rates, particularly at the community college level. The study just came out just a few weeks ago that told us that for students who don't reach a 30-unit type of maximum, that at least 70% of them will not move on. Now, that's a tremendous amount of wasted. California's 108 community college system, we have 2 million students. And what statistics are telling us is that if those students do not reach 30 units, at least 60 to 70% of them will not move on. And so for us, we absolutely look at affordability as an issue. And of course, when affordability is an issue for students at the higher levels, a UC or CSU level, the impacts of them now moving on to community colleges, or moving down, if you will, causes course shortages and a whole host of other problems. So we're very excited to be a part of this particular discussion, and it's clear to us, at least at the state level and as we move forward, that there has to be some movement in what we would call the flat world knowledge type of approach, where we're offering textbooks for free online or affordable textbooks on a per unit basis or per course basis. But there has to be another model, and it's pretty clear to us as I'm transitioning out of office and moving on to our own foundation, for example, that this is really where we need to be focusing, and that is to try to find affordable textbooks for all of our students. And I'll stop there, and of course we'll take some questions later.
Thanks, Dean. That's fantastic. And with that, we're going to turn it over to Dr. Charles Cook, Vice Chancellor at Houston Community College System. So, Dr. Cook.
Well, thanks very much. And Senator Florez, I can certainly echo the same themes are happening here in Texas. As you mentioned in California, our legislature will be convening in January, and there is an estimated $20 to $25 billion shortfall in revenue here in Texas as well. And we've been forewarned by our coordinating board that this could translate into significant cuts for higher education. And sadly, what that may end up doing is resulting in higher tuition rates or higher fees for students. And obviously, for community college students, traditionally hard-pressed to support their families as it is, that's really a difficult burden to bear. You also mentioned that in California, textbooks were about 70% of the cost. Here at HCC, we think they're closer to 100% of the cost of tuition. Our tuition has been relatively affordable to date. It's about $700 for a full-time student who lives in district. But depending upon the courses the student takes, the textbooks will cost anywhere from $500 to $800. The traditional market methods of providing textbooks for students are just not operating very well these days, and Eric's going to go into that, so I'm not going to dwell on that. Our Board of Trustees actually tried to intervene as early as 2007 by calling for some actions as requiring our bookstore to unbundle materials, to require us to have 3-year adoptions, to forbid us from taking any gifts or inducements from publishers, if you would. But that was still not really making much of an impact. In 2008, we assembled a textbook committee to talk about what can we do both in the short term and in the longer term. Short-term actions, we immediately began to look at the various repositories of open source materials. We have a wonderful one here in town at Rice University called Project Connections. So we immediately began training our faculty to explore and to create open source materials. We have had faculty experiment with a lot of different devices, the Kindle, the Edge, the iPad, and really I guess the most popular one being the iTouch, in that it's relatively inexpensive, and yet students can access a host of video and podcasts via the iTouch. Long term, we know that the solution is going to be digital with textbooks, much like is going to be offered through Flat World Knowledge. We are in the midst right now of negotiating a new bookstore contract, and the new bookstore is going to have to provide students with 6 choices, and you see them there on the screen. Students will have a choice to buy a hard copy new, a hard copy used, a hard copy rental that we began this year, digital download, purchasing the material to load on their computer, digital lease to use it for, say, a semester at a time, And then most popular, we hope, will be the print on demand, where students will just pick and choose the digital materials that they might want a copy of and just pay a very low-cost print fee for that. We are continuing to provide professional development for our faculty. We've had Eric in to speak to our faculty, which got a lot of attention and really a lot of interest. And we are continuing to look at open sources. So I think I will end with that, and anxious to hear the presentation and any questions people might have. Eric, am I turning it back to you?
You are. Thank you very much, Dr. Cook. I, of course, was talking with my mute button pressed, which doesn't work very well. So what I'd like to do is take a look at, having come out of the textbook industry, how we arrived at the $200 textbook, and really do a little bit of market analysis before moving to really describing this emerging solution of open or open source textbooks as a major transformative mover in the textbook market. So let's start off with a little history tour. I think of the 1980s as sort of the decade of feet on the street. Publishers there were about 65 textbook publishers in the 80s. They were by and large sort of academically oriented enterprises. And in the 80s, they began to consolidate and become part of larger corporate parents. And they were seeking competitive advantage, and the primary method was to field larger and more professional sales organizations through the 80s, which of course drove costs of the product up, but added negligible or no value, additional value to the end user, the student. Then in the 90s, all those companies consolidated into a handful, literally 4 major publishers. And all of that sort of sales force advantage was negated. And so I think of the 90s, the pursuit of competitive advantage, as being the decade of the nuclear arms race of supplements. It was imperative for us to send our sales reps in to say we have this, we have laser discs and video discs and lecture notes and assessment programs to try to have something that the other guy didn't have. And that, of course, substantially drove up the cost of textbooks with negligible value to the end user. So we arrive in the 2000s at a place where I think there's a profound value gap in the market because of those price increases through those decades. On the one hand, on the one side of that gap, we have students who are increasingly wired and connected, increasingly digitally savvy. But I think really importantly, demographically bring less income into the university than any generation before them in the history of the United States, and work more hours while they're in college than any generation before them in the United States. So you have this profile of the student on one side of this value gap, and on the other side you have a product that's just become increasingly unaffordable. We heard Senator Florez's example of a book that actually started off at a fairly low price and is quickly rising. I took these snapshot of prices from publisher websites a few weeks ago. And these are 5 major introductory market textbooks. These are the leading books in those fields. And you can see that we have arrived at the $200 textbook. The lowest price book you see here is in psychology at $143 and on up. I think in 2 years, the $200 textbook will be the norm for many courses across the curriculum. If you look at this over time, it's pretty devastating. So the bottom line here is consumer price index, or inflation, over a 20-year period. This number is the rise in the cost of tuition and fees at colleges, and this represents the rise in the cost of textbooks. Now the data is getting a little old, but it's sort of directionally relevant, and the point is that that is a tremendous amount of financial pain for the average going college student. And that pain, as has been referenced earlier, is not evenly distributed. On a national average, if you are at a public 2-year community college and you pay X for tuition and fees, you pay 72% of X for textbooks, or almost as much for textbooks as you're paying for the rest of your education. And then you heard of examples where systems have done a good job holding costs down, and I think Texas community colleges and California are probably the best examples of that, where textbooks are now 100% or greater of the total cost of education. And this is literally having a significant negative impact on students. So the Gates Foundation recently funded this study, and they interviewed 600 students, and they tried to assess, why did these students drop out? What were the pressures? What were causing them to be part of that 70%, for example, in California, that doesn't complete? And the answers that jumped off the page with the most statistical significance by far were the two you see in front of you, which was the cost of textbooks and other fees besides tuition affected me financially, and I had to work as well, and it was too stressful trying to do both. Literally, as the study dug into the nuances of that story, what they found out was that students oftentimes sort of prepared for the knowable and predictable cost of tuition. And when they made the decision to enter the college or university, they did so thinking that those were the costs. And what they didn't realize is they were going to have to pay almost 2x when textbook purchases were said and done. And so what happened was they either went without, which then put them behind in their coursework and oftentimes created the pressure to eventually drop out, or they went to work more hours to be able to purchase the textbooks, which dropped them into that second category of trying to balance work and school life at the same time. And so, as you can imagine, students are pretty darn angry and frustrated about the situation. And this is where this sort of value gap that I've been describing in the early 2000s sort of met the internet. And the industry in itself is sort of undergoing turmoil. So every single year, as a student starts to look for alternatives to purchasing a new and expensive textbook in the early 2000s, the internet rolls along and starts to make those alternatives available in greater numbers every year. So the first phenomenon we saw was the rise in the availability of used books, as that industry went from a sort of cottage industry at the local bookstore level to a very rational, efficient national industry with big players like Amazon and Nebraska Books and Missouri Books. So the supply of used books went up every year, which meant new book sales at publishers went down every year. The other phenomenon is the rise of the global gray market. So many of you, if you're faculty out there, have probably noticed students reading from a big, fat-looking book with a different cover on it, but as it turns out, other than the inferior printing quality inside, is the same book, which publishers were putting different covers on and selling overseas at lower costs into overseas markets, and the internet all of a sudden connected those markets, and students could go online and purchase them at lower prices. And so again, new North American book sales at publishers went down. And then finally, we've seen the Napsterization of publishing, where students in their frustration have in essence started copying and scanning books, creating PDFs, and distributing them over peer-to-peer architectures. And so if you go to the internet, to Google, and search for the title of any textbook or the author and title of any book and put free PDF after it, you're almost guaranteed to find a freely available PDF of that book somewhere. Again, this has caused a significant disruption for publishers, and they're selling less new books every year as a result. And so as you can imagine, the publishing industry, like many other media industries, is getting pretty nervous about the situation. And if you missed my nervous effect there, I'll replay it because it's critically important to the presentation. So they're getting very nervous about what's going on in the industry. And so they are coming up with some ideas to preserve revenue in the face of falling unit sales. And one of them is to raise prices faster. So I think the situation, the example that Senator Florez raised was indicative of this particular response. So when I started in the industry 14 years ago, price increases were about 4% a year, steady like clockwork. And as the publishers sold less new units, they tried to charge more for the ones they were still selling. And so price increases across the industry have been double digits the last few years, and in fact look like they were about 13% for the year we just finished. And so prices are rising at a much faster rate than ever before. Customization and bundling. If I can get a new or a unique ISBN ordered at one particular school that's different than the ISBN being ordered at a different school who's also using the same book, then it basically prevents bookstores and students from being able to find used book supplies on the internet. And so it drives them to purchase new from the publisher. And then everybody's favorite, the new edition phenomenon. And so get authors on the new edition treadmill, crank out new edition manuscripts faster and faster. And in essence, again, when I started in the business, new editions were about every 4.5 years. Today they're at about 18 months to 2 years. And so the idea there, of course, is to flush the market of all those lower price substitutes more frequently and be able to recoup investment and profit. Of course, all those new editions end up on faculty's desk, who end up preparing new syllabi and new notes for what really turns out most of the time to be superficial revisions. And so in essence, I think the summary of the textbook market is that nobody's very happy these days. I think students are angry and frustrated. I think faculty are feeling like unwilling participants in a market that doesn't seem to be working like it used to. And I think authors are questioning where their future is in an industry that only pays them royalties when a new book is sold, and increasingly less new books are being sold. So students are still learning from the intellectual property they've created, but they're not getting paid for it. And I think everybody is sort of wondering where the future is going. So with that, I'm going to shift from sort of the problem to an emerging solution. And there are many different flavors of this solution emerging, from different books on handheld devices to licensing models that some schools are playing with. The one we're going to focus on here today is the emerging solution of open textbooks or open source textbooks. So I want to begin by defining what is open, because I think it's an often misunderstood term, particularly as applied to something like a textbook. So this is a fundamentally legal issue. We've lived in a world where intellectual property by default in this country is copyrighted. And the license under which that copyrighted material is made available is all under the very familiar all rights reserved license. Now, if a creator who held the copyright to something like a textbook wanted to make it available, and they didn't want to reserve all the rights to themselves, the only choice that they've had historically was in essence to reserve no rights or put it in the public domain where everybody owns it. I think for the most part that seemed like an untenable solution for most copyright holders. And so what has happened is, as the Internet's become an increasingly important medium for creating, distributing, and consuming content, legal scholars, primarily from Stanford and Harvard, said we need something in between all rights reserved and no rights reserved. And that land is the land of open. And you can think of it very simply as some rights reserved. So the world of openly licensed materials is still built on the same copyright system we've always had. It assumes that somebody, whether it's a publisher or an author, owns the copyright to a work, but they're publishing it and making it available to the public under a different license than all rights reserved. And it's a some rights reserved license, meaning I am going to reserve some rights to me as the creator, and I'm going to give some rights to the public so that they can do more with this open work. So what are the rights that a creator or a copyright holder might want to give to the public? You can think of them as the 4 R's of openness. One is the right to reuse, so the right to copy and use verbatim copies of a work legally. The right to redistribute, to share those copies with other people, including students. And then importantly, I think, are the last two, which are the right to revise and to remix. In essence, to take something which was originally created and then adapt it and rework it and hopefully improve it for your own purposes, whether that's reorganizing this table of contents, whether that's including examples that might be more locally relevant to students, whether it's making changes that make it more culturally relevant to students, whether it's uploading something of your own, like a case study that you referred to in your class, links out to the internet. All of those are just examples of the many different kinds of adaptations one might want to make to a textbook. And then the right to remix, which means to combine any open educational resource with any other open educational resource. So if I had an open textbook and I found an open simulation, I could integrate that open simulation into the open textbook and create something new for my own purposes. Where do open textbooks come from? So I think initially, like many movements, they came from individuals. This is an example of a linear algebra book by Professor Rod Beezer at University of Puget Sound, one of the early sort of pioneers in saying, you know what, I'm going to publish my book under an open license and make it available on a new basis. And individually, people began to do that in greater and greater numbers. Once that started to happen, then the aggregators came along. Dr. Cook mentioned Connections at Rice University. There's another called Merlot in the Cal State system. These are excellent examples of platforms that, in essence, aggregate open content. In the case of Merlot, it's both open content and all rights reserved content together, and you can search for different things. But the point is, both of these contain large amounts of open material that one can search for, find by subject or discipline on those platforms, view it online and assess its appropriateness for your course, and then connect some things together. In the case of Connections, you can pick and choose different open modules to create something that you can deliver to your students. And so those are not publishers, but they're aggregators who are taking the individual contributions of people and making them easier to find and to use. And then, now we've sort of arrived at the place where professional publishers are building models around open textbooks. And I think that Flat World Knowledge, the company that I co-founded with Jeff Shellstead, who came from a long history of being the editor-in-chief and editorial director at McGraw-Hill and then Pearson, is really a good example of what's possible when you apply principles of openness to something like a textbook. So for the next few minutes, I just want to make all of this concrete by walking you through an example. And then we're going to turn it over after that to Dennis Passovoy to talk about the experience of actually using an open textbook. So our model has kind of three core components. The first is to produce and publish quality textbooks. Then we make them openly available, openly licensed. And then we provide students with a whole range of choices about how they're going to consume those textbooks and at what price point. So by the first one, quality textbooks, I simply mean we actually publish textbooks just like the traditional publishers do and from where we came. We go out and we recruit expert authors in their field. We are very selective about our authors. We reject about 95% of proposals that come our way. We professionally develop the manuscript, meaning we do extensive peer review. We have professional illustrators. We copy edit and proofread and accuracy test. We design. We do all the things that publishers do to take an idea from an author's head and turn it into a highly marketable textbook. And we provide support materials like test item files, instructor manuals, print desk copies, PowerPoint lecture notes, and some of the key supplements that faculty need to be able to transition to a new textbook. Where we change, so all of that is kind of putting us on the playing field with a comparable product. And I think that the list of users, we have 1,300 professors now from over 800 universities, is a pretty good testament to the quality of those materials. It ranges from Carnegie Mellon to University of Southern California to Tulane to Texas A&M and across the board. And these are just a small sample of a very large list of adopters in the states of California and Texas who have adopted open textbooks already in the first year and a half that they've been available through Flat World Knowledge. So I think the quality is there. What's different about them, of course, is that they're openly licensed. So we publish our textbooks with a Creative Commons open license, which transfers those 4 R's I described to you, the potential user community. And we actually provide a technology platform online to make it easy to actually customize and change the textbook utilizing that open license. So for example, this is an Exploring Business, an Introduction to Business textbook in our catalog. And if you wanted to customize it, you'd click Customize, and you could drag and drop chapters and sections into a new order simply by grabbing and moving. You could delete things that you don't cover. And you could annotate sections. So if you wanted to put an annotation between paragraphs to students, you could enter that into a box here, save it, and you'll note that it gets attributed to you as the professor. Looks different than the original material, and your students will be instantly able to access the note that you've created. Coming actually in just about 2 weeks, we're out in beta now, is the ability to insert new chapters or sections, so upload a document from your hard drive or from somewhere on the web that you want to include in the table of contents, and to edit right down to the word level. So if I wanted to edit something, I could go right into a section. In this case, I'm in Chapter 2, and I'm in a section here, and I can edit anything in that section. So I can edit the learning objectives, the title of the section, and then any paragraph or any image within the book is editable. So if I wanted to edit this paragraph, I just click on it, and now it's completely editable for me. I can delete it, I can add to it, I can change the example, I can add a link out to the internet, etc. I can also insert new paragraphs. So by going between paragraphs, I can simply click insert here, and I can insert a new paragraph, a bulleted list, a numbered list. And I think actually indicative of where all this is going are a few early examples of kind of multimedia that you can integrate. So if I wanted to integrate a video clip, for example, it's as easy as adding a title, putting the URL on YouTube or Blip TV where that video lives, describing it as I want it to be described in the book, and then putting a citation, which will show up in our citation list at the end of the chapter, and clicking Save. And when you do that, instantly that is available to your students in the online version of the textbook with the player fully available, your description, and for students who buy print books, which we'll get to in a minute, they get the same image and they get the URL of the video displayed to them so they can type it in and go there directly. So when you're done sort of making the changes that you want to make to your book, you click Publish this book from my class, and what happens instantly is our system rebuilds the book, creates a new table of contents with, in linear order, a new index with the proper page references, repaginates everything, and basically gets a cohesive book ready for your students. We then generate a whole bunch of different formats for students to choose from. So we generate a web-based book in HTML. We generate printed books, which students can just purchase standard books at their bookstore or from our site, which we'll talk about. We generate print-it-yourself books, which are PDFs that they can download and print. We produce mobile reader books, so EPUB and MOBI files for things like the iPad and Kindle. We produce audio books, an MP3 file that they can download and listen to. And we produce accessible books, DAISY-readable and digital Braille books, so that students can, who have print disabilities, have the same level of access that everyone else has. And then ultimately the point here is to let students choose the best format for them. And so, for example, when a student, well, actually, I'll get to that in a moment. So the choices that students have are basically from those that list that I just described to you. So one choice that a student has, and this is, of course, remarkably disruptive in the industry, is they can choose to read for free. They literally can read an entire online book in HTML for free. And it's both that web-hosted HTML book and the accessible versions I described for students with print disabilities. Both of those are available at absolutely no cost to the student. The institution has no cost. They just go online, and anybody on the phone could go to our catalog and actually read all the books that we have published there today. So how on earth do we make money? Where's the sustainability in this model? How do we pay our authors, pay employees who produce these things? And that's basically by offering a lot of other choices to students which are saleable. They purchase these things. Now, one set of choices are formats. So today they can buy that softcover book that I described in either black and white or color for $30 or $60, and they can buy it off our site or through their bookstores where actually the majority of sales are happening today. And then they can buy any of those other formats that I described earlier. So they can buy audio versions, they can buy the downloadable PDFs, they can buy the e-reader formats, they can even buy an iPhone version for their iPhone. We also sell digital study aids, so they can buy audio study guides, online quizzes, digital flashcards, and all of those things we make available for sale. So the message for the student is your professor chose the book, you choose the format and price, and go ahead from reading free online to purchasing any of those different formats that I described. Just a couple of data points. Today, 33% of our users choose the black and white or color book, almost overwhelmingly black and white. About 3% download purchase audiobooks, about 17% purchase PDFs. About 2% today are buying the ebooks for the handheld readers, although we expect that number to climb as students own those devices more. And about 45% read for free online. So I think the benefits are pretty clear. I think for authors, they actually have a chance to earn income because we pay them a 20% royalty on any of those items that we sell. And while we sell less of them, only to 55% of the students in the class and at a lower price, we sell consistently every semester. We don't have used books. We don't have all the other noise in the market that I described. And so by the end of about 4.5 semesters, our authors actually are able to make as much as or more money than in a traditional adoption. And authors get a lot of other benefits, from an ability to quickly enter a new market with a competitive textbook that has some advantages over a traditional book, retain customers longer because people make changes to the book, and that is likely to lead to a better experience, and so on. I think for faculty, they get to choose a book that's at least as good as the book that they're currently using, so maintain quality, but get control. Get control over the content so that you can really make it your own over time. Get control over the timing of things like new editions, which we publish, but only tell you what we did and then let you decide if you want to go to a new edition or not. More flexibly integrate things into learning management systems because they're open. You can put it right in there and students can access the books from within the learning management system. And of course, solve the affordability and access problem for students. I think for students, free access is obviously a huge deal. Affordable choices in a whole range of formats is critical, including print, which I think is absolutely essential to the near-term success of many students. Immediate access, so if they register the day before, the material is there immediately. Obviously, they can choose from formats that best meet their learning style. And the question is, will reducing the cost of books increase completion rates? And I just want to point out one early example from Cerritos College. This is President Linda Lacey wrote this article in Community College Weekly recently where she talked about their open textbook experiment. So they piloted 3 open textbooks in 3 introductory business courses. And in essence, this paragraph, which you can't read, says the pilot was a tremendous success. The retention rate was 90.2%, representing an increase of 10 to 15% across those 3 courses. For an educator, it doesn't get any better than that. So simply removing the cost barrier of the textbook led to increases of 10 to 15% in those 3 courses, which is tremendous. Do bookstores benefit? I think bookstores are like all of us, sort of trying to figure out what the new business models are going to look like. And I think this comment from Mark Nelson at the National Association of College Stores says it well. These exciting pilot programs address the need to help the college store channel expand essential services at a time when educational content is evolving. Flatworld is providing necessary innovation that could make the open textbook movement more viable and lead to other fundamental changes in the textbook market. So while we sell through college bookstores today, I think what some of the bookstores in Flatworld are most excited about is experiments we're doing at about 20 colleges around print on demand, where we simply sell the right to print a file, and when students order it, the bookstore prints it on demand, and within a few hours the student can walk in, pick it up, and it's really, in many ways, the best service for everybody because it's quickest, and it also leads to maintaining the highest profit margins for the players involved while still delivering a much more affordable solution to students. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dennis Passovoy to talk about his experience using open textbooks at the University of Texas at Austin. So Dennis.
Thanks, Eric. You know, when I was in college, and you can see from my picture it was a few years ago, I recall spending approximately the same amount of money on my entire semester as students are being asked to spend on a single textbook today. And as Kelly indicated at the outset of the webinar, I currently teach at the University of Texas here in Austin, and I teach management courses and organizational behavior. I've done that for several years, and what I've experienced is that year after year, the textbooks, while they are very high quality, have risen in price every single year. And what's bothered me more than the increase in price is the fact that the model hasn't changed. The content, the quality of the textbooks have materially stayed the same, so just the price has gone up. And being a professor at a university of higher education, I constantly get visited by textbook publishers, and they obviously all want my attention. They want to know which textbooks I've adopted, and if there's a chance, I'll look at theirs. And so I've taken every opportunity to meet with them, in part to see what's out there, but also in part to let them know that I really haven't liked their model. And so for years, I've been talking to them about coming out with a different model. When are you going to come out with a textbook that can be put on an e-reader so that these poor kids don't have to walk around with, 20 or 50 or more pounds on their back full of textbooks? And every single one of the publishers I've met with have been very excited about their online model. And when they show it to me, it's nothing more than the same expensive textbook, but just displayed on a computer monitor. No ability to customize, no ability to meet the students where they live. And as I indicated, the price continued to go up. So about a year ago, maybe a little bit longer, I was approached by yet another textbook publisher, in this case Flat World Knowledge. And at first I was a little bit put off, and I thought, I don't need another textbook publisher. There's just too many out there. But I took a few moments, I read the materials that they had distributed to me, and I took some time to think about it, and it dawned on me that here was a publisher that actually understood what I had been telling publishers for years. And I call it the razor and blade model, which I'm sure Eric is either extremely happy with or displeased with, I don't know. But basically, in this case, the book is the razor, which for the students is free, and the blades, all of the things that Eric showed you just a few moments ago, the ability to get the format in whatever version you want, the ability to add on all of the support and study tools, those are the blades. And some students need them, some don't. Some professors need them, some don't. And so it's almost infinitely configurable. My students love it because I was dealing with a textbook that was nearly $200. It had, in the period I had been using it, it had gone up from just a little over $100, about $120, on up to almost $200 in just a period of about 4 or 5 years. And because the content is every bit as good with the Flat World Knowledge book that I use as it was in the alternative publisher books. In fact, it's even better because since it's online, the content is going to be more up to date. It's going to be more current. It's going to be more relevant, and the price couldn't be better. So at the end of the day, what all of this has translated for me and for my students, is content that is at least as good, if not better, than all the other choices, a set of support tools and support as a faculty member that also is at least as good, if not better, than the alternatives. And a model, and this is probably the most important part to me, that meets the students where they live, rather than forcing the students to adapt to a publisher's model that is easily, I don't know, 100 to 150 years old. Instead, this is a model that meets the students on their turf and accommodates them financially, economically, and also accommodates them with the type of format that today's student would appreciate, whether it's audio, whether it's ebook, or whether it's online. And those that want it in print can get it in print. Eric, I'll send it back to you, and happy to entertain questions when we get to that segment in a few moments.
Thanks, Dennis. Much appreciated. So I'm going to bring it to conclusion by just briefly mentioning there are lots of other open initiatives out there. I mentioned Connections at Rice University, which you should certainly check out. In California, I mentioned Merlot. There's also the Community College Open Textbook Project and Community College Open Educational Resource Consortium. Those are groups of community colleges getting together to encourage the creation of and adoption of open textbooks. In Washington State, they're doing some really innovative work called the Open Course Library, where in partnership with the Gates Foundation, they are redesigning 81 introductory courses, most heavily enrolled courses, and republishing those courses as open courses to also include open or at least low-cost textbooks as part of those open courses. In Florida, there's the Orange Grove Text Project, which is open textbooks coming out of the university press at University of Florida, but now expanding to include contributions from other faculty members across the state of Florida. So lots going on. Big list here of projects, very different from one another, but all to indicate that there's a lot of activity in the world of open education resources and open textbooks today. So in conclusion, I think it's clear that knowledge is the black gold of the 21st century, that workers are competing for access to labor forces and to jobs all around the world, and that the differentiator between those who have and those who don't will increasingly be access to knowledge and education. And I think it's also, you can see the power of that in some of these college board statistics that I've put up here. But this is the income gap between high school graduates and college graduates has increased significantly over time. There's a correlation between higher levels of education and higher earnings for all racial, ethnic groups and for both men and women. Higher levels of education are correlated with higher levels of civic participation, including volunteer work, voting, blood donation, and more. The young children of college graduates display higher levels of school readiness indicators than children of non-college graduates, thus perpetuating the value of education. And so on across a whole range of benefits identified with access to higher education. And I think it's pretty clear that technology now enables us to deliver information and education in fundamentally new ways that not only bring down barriers to access, but bring up quality at the same time. So the technology is there, and the problem we really have, as Dennis pointed out, is old business models are standing in the way, business models that were built on a world that predated the internet. And so I think that the opportunity before us is to now start to embrace new models that are market-based, that add value to students, add value to faculty, add value for authors, and that really it's as simple as making a decision to change from a proprietary high-priced textbook to an open textbook. And that decision is the exercise of one's market power, and collectively those decisions are going to begin to move this market, I think, in very new directions. So with that, we're done with the formal presentation part. We did indicate that this webinar would be 1 hour. It's 4 minutes short of the hour. We will go into questions and answers. For those who wish to remain on, please feel free to do so, and you can remain for as long as questions are still coming. We'll stay on for about another 15 minutes taking questions. And Kelly McDonald, who opened this, will moderate the Q&A session and direct questions to one of the panelists. So Kelly?
Excellent. Thank you, Eric. I should just review. We've gotten a number of good questions already during the presentation, and I'll share with the panelists in just a moment. For those of you that would like to submit a question, I will remind you that if your control panel has closed, if you'll click on the orange arrow, it will open it up, and you can use that to go ahead and share any questions. They will come to us privately, and I'll direct it to the appropriate person. We've got a number of good questions here. We've got a couple of people on from various bookstores. I'm going to direct this question first to Eric and actually then also to Dr. Cook, because I believe HCC is doing some fairly innovative things here. Can I still get this book from my bookstore, and how is the role of the bookstore changing? Eric first, and then Dr. Cook, if he wants to address that.
Yeah, so I mean, we certainly provide bookstore discounts to be able to purchase books at a reduced price and then be able to mark them up based on their own local costs and resell them for prices that are comparable to those that we sell for directly from our website. So books are available through bookstores. But I do think, as I mentioned, that I think bookstores are going to increasingly shift into providing multiple formats, including print-on-demand books, so that they can remain very sort of nimble going into this next generation of distributing changing educational content. So I think that the progressive bookstores are going to experiment with a lot of different ways of delivering content and find their way through those experiments to the models that work. Dr. Cook?
Well, I agree, and we're actually helping our bookstore make that decision as a result of any new contract that will be negotiated. We like the business model very much that you described, Eric, and we are going to ask our new bookstore provider to offer students the 6 choices that I listed earlier in the slide so that they have a full range and that they can make the decision. Do they want to spend the big bucks for the hard copy new, or do they want to acquire it digitally and or print on demand at a much cheaper cost?
Excellent. Thank you very much for that answer. Senator Florez, I think this question would be directed to you. There are many players in this space. Private companies, foundations, legislators in some states have gotten involved. What do you find, what is your perspective on the various parties and the role that they may play in accelerating a move towards emerging solutions such as open textbooks?
Right. Well, I think first legislators need to become aware of the issue. Very much detached from the fact that the faculty members themselves are unaware of the book costs when they are purchasing a book for their students, or actually the increase. So I think there needs to be a whole level of awareness from legislators and policymakers in this particular arena, particularly in the higher education space, where the many adopters are simply the faculty members themselves. I think once we get the legislators accustomed to the fact that they can have a tremendous impact by moving to open educational resources, for example, or really promoting as part of the choices that students have. This very, very good slide that was presented earlier today. I mean, I think that's the issue, is trying to how to figure out getting policymakers involved in this arena and to make sure that open source is part of the milieu of choices for students as they move forward. So I think it's absolutely critical. It's just going to take a lot more education. And foundations, of course, are very, very important in this space, and they have been important in this space. But there needs to be a more sustainable, evergreen type of approach to this, because we've got to get the word out. And I think everything that people have done throughout the nation, from Cable Green and in Washington all the way down to the California Consortium's efforts, they're all positive. The simple question is, how do we get this up and running from an adoption point of view? And I think adoption is the key issue there.
Absolutely. I will amend or add to your comments about what's going on up in Washington. I got a nice note here from Cable Green, who has done some terrific work up in the Washington area, who wanted to also put in a word that we might want to mention the new Washington State CTC open policy. Yes. All digital software, educational resources, and knowledge produced through competitive grants offered through and or managed by the SBCTC will carry a Creative Commons attribution license. You want to add anything to that, Senator Florez?
Well, I think that those are the types of policies we're looking at, and I think although the California Community Colleges have had the summits, if you look at the work that Judy Baker and others have been putting forward, there needs to be a more cohesive, moving forward plan that pulls it all together. And I think cable has been very successful in Washington State. I think it's a good model to look at. Texas has been outstanding in the K through 12 space as well, and now moving into higher ed. California is lagging in terms of the policy side of it, and I think this is something hopefully we'll see in the next couple of years.
Can I jump off that for another question that had come in, and also to tie in a couple of other questions? We've got a lot coming in, so I'm trying to merge them where appropriate. There was a question that I would ask to Eric as, are there any plans to go into the K-12 market? Are there K-12 schools that are using open textbooks? And also I might suggest that perhaps Dr. Cook might have a couple comments on that, where there was a question about the state of Texas, and there have been a number of legislative initiatives there to make funding available for digital textbooks, open textbooks, et cetera, if you want to say something along those lines. So Eric, do you want to take that and then pass that to Dr. Cook?
Sure. I mean, so Flat World Knowledge does not have any intent to publish K-12 textbooks, open textbooks. I think the need in K-12 is at least as great. The challenge, I think, from our perspective is that the decision-making process is much more obfuscated. There are many more levels of hierarchy, and it's a really big wins and big losses kind of a marketplace. And so we decided that the appropriate place to tackle this was at the college level, where you could begin where individual faculty had the right to choose the book for their class, and you could sort of knock down decisions one at a time and build a marketplace. That's not to say that someday that won't change, but I think our view is that we will remain in higher education, and then we will move to higher education globally before we move down into K-12. That said, you know, we have about 50 high schools that adopt our textbooks today, and as we publish more books like elementary algebra, which comes out in a few weeks, like U.S. history, which comes out in the spring, etc., many more of those will end up in U.S. high schools by default. There are also some excellent open publishers or open repositories in K-12. Most notably, I think at this point, is CK12, ck12.org, which is a nonprofit publisher of open textbooks, and curriki.org, curriki.org. So there is activity in the K-12 space. You just won't see Flat World Knowledge there in the near future. Dr. Cook, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, I don't really. I expect we'll probably see some legislative initiatives in this area, and I hope we can work with them to influence the policy. But Eric, in response to some of your comments, an area that intersects public ed and higher ed are the dual credit and early college high schools that are proliferating around our state, at least. And textbooks are a huge issue because whereas the state of Texas provides the textbooks free to public school students, they do not provide them the dual credit textbooks. And so this could be a huge market. You're serving the college course, but you could be serving an even larger market with the dual credit students.
No, that's a great point, and those are definitely growing, I think, around the country, so it is an emerging marketplace.
Thank you. I've got a lot of questions about integration with online text. I'm going to slip in one more policy questions to the Senator that is specific to California, so you can just take a moment for this one. California currently taxes textbook sales. If we switch to open textbook sales, state revenues will decline, and Pell Grant aid to California students will decline as books are factored into the cost of attendance formulas. How does this help the state budget? Will California look at exempting textbooks from sales tax as most states do? It's a complex question if you want to tackle that, or pass.
Yeah, it is, but I think that in the long run, if you look at I think it's been mentioned by Eric and others, you know, the actual increases per year in textbooks cost and what that actually does, let's just use from a Cal Grant point of view. I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense in order to bring down the overall cost of what we see incremental increases in our state budget for Cal Grant increases that basically are paying for book publishing. publisher increases or student store increases. These are the kinds of things that we need to tackle. Now, the sales tax loss on this probably will more than make up in the savings for students who actually move to these other types of open technologies and open resources. And let's just face it, I think if you look at, if you will, the real issue, at least in California, of moving people through the pipeline in higher education, developmental ed and trying to get better platforms and better types of experiences for those students to go through the system. As I mentioned, the students that never make it past 30 units, 70% drop out, tremendous amount of wasted resources and taxpayer dollars. If we can find a better way to produce that type of content, that type of medium, then I think you're going to find much better investment types of approaches from taxpayers to say, look, I'm putting my money into the system, people are really getting through, and we are producing a million types of baccalaureate necessary for the job market in the future. So I actually don't think the sales tax loss is an issue as compared to what really we would be saving students and, more importantly, the student experience going forward.
Great. That was a great answer. I'd like to lump together a couple of different questions and direct them to Eric. Great question came in about site licensing. Why not site license introductory textbooks either for the state or the institution? Then you'd have two different prices for a class, one including text and one without. One would include the expected textbook price with those without. And then I want to lump that together. We got a number of very good questions about who is Flat World Knowledge's print-on-demand vendor, what platform is the ebook on, LMS integration, a couple questions along those lines. So Eric, do you want to start that with the notion of sort of the institutional licensing model and talk a little about printing on demand and how that's being handled?
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting. There's enough complex issues to think about when you're first getting introduced to open textbooks that I tend not to talk about licensing models, but I think one of the more interesting and exciting areas for textbook pricing models is the idea of licensing textbook content. So just maybe the best way to do it is to be concrete about an example. So we have for example, the Virginia State University College of Business licenses textbooks from us for their 8 core introductory business courses. And what they do is they pay $19.95 per student. They collect that as part of the tuition of those students. And in exchange for that $19.95 per student, they have complete access to the textbook in all of the different formats that I described and all of the different digital study aids that I described. And so, and they can integrate those things directly into their courses so that it's a seamless part of the student's experience. And so I think that increasingly we are doing more of those kinds of licensing deals, and I think that we're going to see that continue to increase because it brings the cost per student down tremendously. It's a predictable cost. It gives the students the maximum range of choices without having to choose, hey, I want to buy the print book, but maybe once I spent my money on that, I wanted to buy the audio chapter later, but I don't want to spend any more money. All those choices sort of go away, and it really provides, I think, an interesting new model going forward. So I think licensing of textbook content is going to be a significant force in the market in the next 5 years. We print everything on demand, so as soon as we get an order from a bookstore or from an individual student, the file, if it's been customized, it's that customized file goes directly to a print-on-demand vendor. Today we use 2 different vendors, Consolidated Graphics, which is a big multi-billion-dollar printing operation, and R.R. Donnelley, another huge printing operation, both of whom have significant digital printing operations now. And so we route the order to the print facility closest to that student or bookstore. It gets printed and spends about 24 hours drying on the shelves and then gets shipped off directly to that customer or to that bookstore. And so print on demand is phenomenal because it allows you to only fulfill an order once it's been requested and to be able to basically be very dynamic about custom content. So if it gets customized, you can deliver that customized book very easily. As regards learning management systems, we do what standard publishers do in terms of making our test item files compatible with all the major LMSs like Blackboard and Moodle and Sakai and Desire to Learn, etc., and some of our other faculty side resources. I think one of the more interesting things about open textbooks, though, is that, for example, our open book is really just a collection of individual URLs for individual sections. So one could actually disaggregate the book if you wanted to and really make it a seamless part of a course. So instead of saying here's the course materials and here's the book link, which you could certainly do, you could say here's module number 1, here's the reading for this module, and connect just to that particular reading. And the student has a much more sort of cohesive experience that way. You can also embed our textbooks directly in the learning management system. For anybody who's ever used an embed code where you can embed a web page or something right in the LMS, because we have URLs for every chapter and section, we can render an embed code. And so you could embed our book and it opens up directly inside one's LMS. And so the student is having a totally seamless experience right within the LMS. They're not jumping around to different sites, and they're accessing the course materials, they're accessing the textbook materials, and all of the sort of collaborative functionality that the LMS provides. So I think open textbooks offer some real advantages over traditional textbooks inside the LMS.
Thank you very much, Eric. I'd like to change the tone a little bit with a great question that came in. And I believe it might actually be from a student because we've got a number of students that I believe have joined us on the call. What can students specifically do to promote and encourage professors to look into these textbook alternatives? A great question. Eric, do you want to take that one?
I'll start.
Once you start, pass it.
Yeah, I'll make a quick comment, but I'd love to hear other people's. I think everybody actually would have something significant to say there. I mean, I think students, the most important thing you can do is talk about it. I mean, I think the more faculty become aware of the option, and the more students can respectfully just talk about the option with professors to say, hey, listen, it's your choice, and I'm glad you're focused on the most quality resources for the class, but have you ever looked to see if there was an open textbook available for the course? I'd really encourage you to try it out. I've used one before, and it was a fabulous experience. So I think that really genuine dialogue is the most important thing that can happen. We're doing lots of things, like we're having students actually engage in a YouTube contest to create videos about the impact of textbooks on high-priced textbooks on their ability to complete their education, and we're sharing those with faculty. Students are doing work in their local media markets to get stories written in their college papers and other local media around the university. So there's lots that students can do, some formal, and I think in many ways the most important stuff is the informal stuff. So others have comments on that?
Eric, hi, this is Charles. We actually had our president of our student government on our textbook committee, and they jumped on this issue. They embraced it and actually presented a student petition to our Board of Trustees to move us, press us in this direction. They were very vocal and very supportive of this idea. And the Board of Trustees listens to the students. They voiced their desire and their support for moving this forward.
Would anybody else like to add anything to that?
Well, I would add, this is Dennis, I'd add a slightly different twist on that. One of the lectures that I devote part of during my semester with my students is to talk to them about what works for them. They clearly know that we can stand up and do the same old drab two-dimensional PowerPoint presentations droning on for hours. They hate that. And so that invites the conversation, well, tell me what does work for you. And so as faculty, I think we have an obligation to continually check in with our students and find out what would work best for them, even to the point of making suggestions of, here's an alternative textbook model. How does the open model work for you? And that helps get the word out amongst the students, which then can in turn be passed around to their other professors.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We have time for probably just one or two more questions. Actually, this would be perhaps a good one to close on as we're coming up to the 15 minutes that we said we would allot for questions. We were asked whether or not this presentation would be available under the 4 R's and open licensing. Eric, do you want to talk about that and talk about what people can do from here if they are interested in helping us?
Sure. Yeah, we will distribute the presentation afterwards to everybody who's registered. You'll get an email with a URL to the presentation, and we will add a Creative Commons copyright mark to it so that it will be available under a Creative Commons open license for distribution.
Excellent. With that, I think we will close our webinar. I wanted to say thank you to our speakers and panelists who were able to join us today, Senator Dean Florez, Dr. Charles Cook, Eric Frank, and also Dennis Passovoy. We recognize that there are a lot of different ways that you can spend an hour and 15 minutes during your day, and we appreciate you taking the time with us today to learn a little bit more about the textbook affordability issues and emerging solutions. For any additional information, you will get a survey afterwards. You can reach out to us at some of those contact information that's provided. And thank you once again for your time. Have a good day.
Thank you.